rather than kind of one by one going through the subcommittees and giving you the details, I just wanted to highlight 3 things today. And 3 different subgroups are touching these 3 issues, so I thought it would be appropriate. First, consumer behavior. We have a consumer behavior subgroup, as you heard briefly today. Part of the grant, the E-Energy Vermont grant, is allowing Vermont Electric Co-op and CVPS to undertake consumer behavior studies. There are others of these going on nationwide, but not many. And to have 2 of them in Vermont is a big deal. And these consumer behavior studies are going to be designed to help figure out how Vermonters will interact with the smart grid. What are the best practices? What works? What doesn't work? What can we do to make the system the most efficient it can be going forward? So the consumer behavior subgroup is helping to lead that effort with CVPS and Vermont Electric Co-op. And the other utilities here are planning to learn from that as they roll out their systems. There have been challenges, and one of the things that the consumer behavior subgroup is looking at, and certainly the department is looking at, is the lessons learned elsewhere. We've seen in California and in Maine and other places in the country resistance, actually, as smart meters start to be rolled out. And we want to avoid, if possible, that resistance here in Vermont, because we truly believe that this new advanced meter, it's an infrastructure upgrade, really. And it's an important infrastructure upgrade for Vermont and for the country to compete in the energy future that we have in front of us. So we need the infrastructure upgrade. The question is, how do we communicate that to consumers so that they can see the benefits and not feel uncomfortable, that they need somehow to worry about this new technology coming into their homes? So we had at the beginning, I would say, maybe without much thought even, a mandatory mentality. You know, we just sort of assumed, like all infrastructure, we're just going to put it out there. It's infrastructure. Everybody's going to have it, and that's how it's going to be. And we've seen in other places the resistance that's developed when that mandatory assumption has been made. And so we're trying to get it right in Vermont. We don't yet know the answer. The consumer behavior subgroup and the department and the utilities, we're all talking about it right now. And we're looking at whether narrow, targeted opt-out programs that specifically both describe the benefits to the consumers and then also appropriately charge the cost of foregoing the new infrastructure would allow consumers a choice, so that, frankly, it tamps down the concern and just makes the rollout not only go more smoothly, but also increases acceptance statewide. And that's really the point of looking at whether an opt-out is appropriate. And it may not be the same answer for all utilities. Service territories differ in terms of density and challenges. Technology differs somewhat. So it is a conversation in the state right now, and I think it's an important one. It's one we really want to get right, because if we can get it right here, other states can look to Vermont as a positive example, rather than looking at some of the negative examples that have happened elsewhere and say, let's do it that way. So that's the Consumer Behavior Study Group challenge. Second issue, rate design. This one, like the other subgroups, we had attempted to put together a statewide, utility-wide rate group, rate design subgroup. Sorry, having a little speaking problem there. And it sounds technical, and it is, frankly, but what it really is meant to do is to figure out how rates, which up until this point, folks have just sort of taken for granted. You get your bill, you pay your electric bill. You think about the rate perhaps when it goes up, but otherwise you don't think much about it month to month. The rate design subgroup really had to tackle the problem of how are rates going to communicate with customers. It's a whole new way of thinking about a very technical thing. And frankly, the rate design subgroup had some trouble because it was difficult to achieve a statewide consensus about when do you offer new rates to consumers? What type of rates are those? Do you go to a faster rate rollout, or do you take it slow? Those were questions that the subgroup looked at and frankly had trouble with. And I have, coming in new, I have a perspective on why that might be. I think the reason the subgroup has had trouble with that is because none of us have a crystal ball. And we really don't know, standing here today, what this technology will be capable of 5 years hence. And the reason we don't know that is because technology has this funny way of improving our lives in ways we can't even foresee until it gets there. whether it's applications that private companies may roll out that will integrate with our home appliances and networks and be able to communicate with our meter and with our utilities, whether it's even better efficiencies in the system that are designed currently. We just can't know exactly what the future will hold for this technology. And so when it comes to rates, there's a real concern that if you roll a rate out without knowing what it will do to the consumers and what they'll think about it, you could be making the wrong choice. So again, the consumer behavior studies are important in that regard. In my opinion, leading the department, it should be slow and steady. Slow and steady wins the race. We should have a system that allows for calibration and best practices to develop over time. We should test a rate, time of use rate, critical peak pricing. What does that do for customers? Do they like that? Is it helping their bills? Are there unanticipated consequences? We should be looking at that statewide and utility by utility, and then calibrating and rolling out with the lessons learned firmly in mind. So that's the second issue, rate design. And then finally, let me talk about something that I think, if not unique to Vermont, it certainly makes Vermont unusual. And that is what we've sort of blithely referred to, at least in the state government, as the marriage between broadband and smart grid. And I went to a conference down in Virginia a few months ago, and a colleague, another energy policy person from, I think it was Virginia, came over to me and said, "What's this marriage? You know, what's Vermont talking about? Marriage between smart grid and broadband." And really, it's simple. It's this. In order for the meter system to communicate back to the utilities, you have to have a communication system. And one way to think of smart grid is just an overlay of a communication system on the electric system that we already have. That's maybe the simplest way of thinking about the smart grid.